Hey, what's up? It's Bon. Let's talk about A Plague Tale Requiem. I finished the story last night. I was in tears. Not many games, I'm not much of a crier, so games don't get me like that very often. This one definitely did, and so I want to talk about it. Especially while it's still kind of raw, I want to talk about it. So, this is going to be spoiler filled. I'm going to talk about the story. I'm going to talk about the ending, especially. And so I suggest if you haven't played it, please do. It's such a good game, especially if you're on Game Pass. It's part of it, day one. So it's a good game. Probably a top 5 game ever for me, and it's my game of the year for 2022. I don't see anything coming out that is going to top it. So, spoilers, just throwing it out there, and let's kind of talk about it. So I want to talk about the ending, the story, and I want to talk about 2 themes that I picked up that may have been personal. Maybe not everyone will feel the same, and that's fine. So, A Plague Tale Requiem is a sequel to a game called A Plague Tale Innocence that came out a few years ago. It essentially tells the story of a little boy who has an infection that his mother is trying desperately to cure. He doesn't really have a relationship with his older sister. Her name's Amicia. The little boy's name is Hugo. In the first game, tells the story of the plague happening in France and how it's connected to the disease her little brother has, the Hugo that he has. And at the beginning of the story, Amicia and Hugo's father is killed by someone who's part of like an inquisition, essentially. They're trying to find the cause of this plague, and they're blaming people, mystics and stuff like that. And they catch on that there's a boy with an infection, and they suspect that he's the cause of the plague. So the whole first game is mostly escaping this organization that's trying to, at first they think kill Hugo, but then they find out later they actually want to use him because his disease is connected to the plague, and he can actually control these like waves of rats that are just devastating the entire country and potentially the world. And this organization thinks that his ability to control the plague essentially would be very strategically useful, and they want him to be on their side in order to rule the world, basically. So the first game is more of a tale of Amicia and Hugo learning about what's happening and breaking away, right? The second game is not. It is a little bit. The second game is a search for a cure. And Hugo has these dreams of an island with 2 teeth, and the beginning of the game has them thinking that they've settled down, they've found a safe place to be. This is taking place during the Plague, Inquisition, 100 Years' War in France. And it's a time of turmoil in France. And they think that they've found a safe place to be. As this game goes, they quickly find out that that isn't the case. They go on the run, again from the same organization who's trying to capture Hugo and use him. Long story short, find the island that he's been dreaming of. They think that it's going to save him. They end up finding out that his disease is something that's happened over and over in history. He actually finds the last child who was infected down in a vault, chained up, and he was so sad and angry. This disease that he had, it overtook him and overtook everything and caused the plague. And so now he has it, and his sister Amicia is determined for him never to be alone and to not be overtaken by the disease, to not become like the child before him, and to try to save the world, essentially. What was really interesting to me is as the game was wrapping up and ending, I was maybe the last person on earth to realize that this disease he had that was causing the plague and that allowed him to control the rats and stuff like that, this game mechanic was a pretty obvious nod to cancer, throughout the 2 games, especially the second one. even visibly, the disease is slowly taking him over, and he's losing who he is, and he's becoming a vessel for the disease rather than an individual with the disease. And this hit me pretty hard because, long story short, I was raised by a single dad ever since I was about 3. And the main mother figure in my life was my aunt. When I was very young, my dad was very young. He was only 20 years older than me. And so he was working, going to school, trying to, make a life for us. And so my aunt took over as a parental figure, and a lot of times, and especially a motherly figure for me. And she took me to sports things, and she was a teacher, so she taught me how to read, and we were very, very close. And in high school, she got diagnosed with colon cancer, and it didn't seem like a big deal at first. At the time, I didn't realize that the prognosis for that type of cancer isn't great. I just knew she was getting treatment. She seemed like she was okay. And eventually, she was, after some surgeries and stuff, they said she was cleared up. And then unfortunately, a few months later, she got sick again and extremely quickly deteriorated, where she passed away on, unfortunately, Mother's Day of the year she passed. And playing through this game, I've never dealt with a child or with a younger person with cancer, but I definitely saw the connection and what they were trying to show. And even from like stories you hear about kids, who are going through that, and some of the really tragic stories that you see pop up on the news or whatever, it was really interesting how well I feel like they used Hugo to portray this situation, this basically terminal situation for a child. This child, Hugo, in the game, is exposed to just trauma, just constantly, has power that he doesn't understand, has power to essentially rule the world. That's why people are so desperate to control him. But throughout the game, they do such a good job of humanizing Hugo, and he loves flowers. You learn through the game, and every time you stumble upon a new flower, he talks about it and how beautiful it is and things like that. He recognizes the beauty in the world and of people, the good in people who don't seem like they're very good. Throughout the journey, you meet people who, Amicia, as Hugo's protector, is very skeptical of anyone who wants to help them. Hugo wants to be friends with everyone. Hugo only cares about his mother and his sister, and being a kid, which, the comparison to like kids with cancer and stuff like that. You see these stories, and that's how these kids are. They don't want to be a kid with cancer. They just want to be a kid. And as the story goes, the disease takes over Hugo more and more. Amicia gets more and more desperate, and it comes to a point where they realize that the cure they were seeking just doesn't exist. And when they learn about the previous child who was sick with this, that you learn that the previous child also had a protector, who tried to save him before he was locked away and left alone, and she was actually killed by the guards of this organization. And you see that now they think that they don't need a cure. Amicia just needs to protect him and keep him from being alone, and that everything will be okay. And this is where the second theme that I picked up on, of this kind of this parenthood, or even the siblinghood, really played in. And throughout the entire game, for the most part, Hugo's attached to your hip. When you are walking or running around, he's holding your hand. When you climb ledges, you pick him up and put him on top, and then you jump up and he helps you. When you jump down off of elevated areas, Amicia jumps down and turns around and catches Hugo, and they go about their way. They speak, they talk to each other constantly. He expresses that he's scared or that he sees something beautiful, and she responds. they did a really good job of having really, really lighthearted moments mixed in with some of the darkest stuff I've ever seen in media. There's a point earlier in the game where you get to this open field and it's just this beautiful like field of flowers and like wheat, I think, or something, and there's a tree off in the distance, and they have this kind of sibling back and forth of like, oh, I'm gonna beat you to that tree, you're a little chicken. You know, Amicia says to him, he's a little boy. I believe Amicia in this game is 15 or 16. I believe Hugo is 5 or 6, and they race, and they have this really beautiful moment where, you know, Amicia lets him win. They have this kind of lighthearted moment. She's injured, and so there's a whole different story behind that. But that moment pretty much has to be there, because if it wasn't, the rest of the game would be so hard. And then from a parenthood aspect, I have a 3-year-old, and I don't think you have to be a parent to appreciate this game, but I think it definitely deepens the connection, because you see Amicia's dedication to doing whatever she has to do for Hugo. And you know, you feel that yourself with your own children, and you feel that whole thing of that you would do anything for them, even if people are telling you it's a waste or it doesn't make sense. You would do it anyways if you think that there's any chance it could help. And that's what this whole story is about, is Amicia going to the ends of the world, literally, to save her brother. And then the ending starts to come. And game-wise, story-wise, what happens is they find out that this island that Hugo has been dreaming of was just essentially the cemetery for the previous boy, and that through the disease, he's able to kind of feel and think some of the previous boy's feelings and thoughts. And they try to get away because they realize that this place isn't good. The organization who's been trying to control Hugo is there, and there's a count, the leader of the island, who realizes what Hugo is, and wants him. And long story short, that person gets possession of Hugo, and takes him to try to control him, to control the world, because that's been the goal all along. And what happens is Hugo's led to believe that his sister Amicia has died and that the Count has killed her. And because of that, he goes down the same path as the previous boy, who his protector actually was killed, and he went nuclear, essentially, and set this plague off. And that's what happens with Hugo. As Amicia and some of your comrades go back to save him and try to recover him, the island essentially explodes in the plague and of this apocalyptic hellscape. You kill the Count, and then after that, the rest of the game, a couple chapters, the last couple chapters, is just you trying to get to Hugo. And all along, Amicia is still talking about saving him, trying to get him away from this disease, from this organism almost at this point. And she goes through all of these trials and tribulations to get to him, even to the point where there's a thing at the end of the game, towards the end, before the final, where you're in this like dream state, and she's following these big phoenix statues that are facing a certain way. Earlier in the game, you had to do this to find an answer to a puzzle. And so you start off following the direction that these phoenix statues are facing. You're doing that. But then Hugo's voice comes up in this kind of ethereal voice, and he says, you have to stop doing things the same way. You need to change for this to end. And so it clues you in that you need to do the puzzle backwards. So you need to go the opposite way that they're facing. And what happens is you get to a point where you're surrounded by the rats, and they're actually forming into these big brute figures and coming after you. And your first instinct, like the rest of the game, is to kill them all with fire. And so you do that, and then it doesn't work. And so you go through the puzzle again, and you come to realize that you have to give up. And when you give up, you come back to reality, and you approach the place where Hugo is, and he tells you, You know what you have to do. You've known all along, to save the world and to end my pain. You know, and he never comes out and says it, but it's implied that you have to kill him. And you walk up to this big, almost tree-like look where he's like embedded in it. And there's actually two choices. You have one of your companions is with you, and Amicia can either take out her slingshot, which is her main weapon, and kill her brother to end this plague and his suffering and do everything. Or if you actually wait long enough, your companion will do it for you. It doesn't show it, thank God. And I've seen a lot of reviews. I've seen people say like, oh, that was predictable. And I guess it was, but that's okay, because it still works, at least in my opinion, because they set up the characters well enough, because they set up, you know, the connection between Hugo and Amicia, and how Amicia literally would do anything to save him, only for the ending to require her to save him by not saving him. It is kind of cliche, but they set it up so well that that's okay. This story wasn't gonna have a happy ending, and I think that goes back to my comparison to like the cancer and all that you know, those stories don't always have happy endings, but something good can come of it. And so there's the funny part was for me is that I was emotional during this ending sequence. That was very hard and very good. But what actually got me bawling like a baby was an epilogue where it's about a year later. Amicia has gone somewhere to the mountains where her family had a cabin that you learn about during the game. And it's just her. And one of your companions comes to get you because Amicia wants to go out and figure out who is going to be affected by this next, and try to lay out a plan for the next protector like herself to be able to stop it, even though she wasn't able to. We'll get to that. But there's this really interesting sequence when the companion and Amicia go to the horses to go to the ship and go off on their next adventure. But Amicia says, wait, I need to go do something. And Amicia is going to see and visit, probably for the last time, a monument that she built for Hugo. And on the way to the monument, it just like murdered me once I realized what was going on. I mentioned before that every time you traverse anything, every time you climb something or jump down or walk through a crack in the wall, or it was always, Amicia would always take very special care to make sure that she was bringing Hugo along safely and so on. And the whole journey to his memorial, you are replaying all these mechanics again. You're climbing up onto a ledge, you're dropping off, you're squeezing between, in the middle of a crack, and you're alone. And so during the whole game, she's helping him, they're talking while these things are happening, and she's silent. And she's not lifting him up first and then climbing. She's just climbing by herself. She's not jumping down and then catching him. She's jumping down and there's no one there with her. And that was such a cool way for them to really reinforce what had happened, because you were so used to those mechanics during the game that you stopped thinking about them. And then when you're doing them and he's not there anymore, it like just really hit me to the core. And then she goes to his memorial and has this sweet dialogue, and then the game ends. There is a post-credit scene that I think suggests that they're going to have, that they will make a third game, and it's going to take place in modern day times. And my bet is that we're going to play as a relative of this family. And we're going to play as like a modern day Amicia, who is going to have a little brother who's suffering from this affliction, and she's going to have to go back into their family history to find this lesson that Amicia is going to try to teach the people in the future. At the end of Requiem, whatever Amicia goes to do, I think in the next game we'll have a modern day character trying to track her path, which would be really cool. But I don't know. I've been rambling for a really long time. I don't expect, consider this more of a podcast, I guess, of me just talking about why I like this game so much. I mean, to me, this was a 9.5 out of 10. They had some flaws, and the first third of the game was a little hard for me to get really into, but it definitely made up for it. This is my 2022 game of the year. This is a top 5, maybe even top 3 game for me now. Right up there with like Hellblade and things like that. Just a really good journey, and I'm really glad I played it. And it's one of those games where I'm really mixed between I would love to play it again one day. You'll never feel those feels the same way the second time because you know what's going to happen. But I also kind of never want to play it ever again, because I think what would be hard, and even looking back at some of my screenshots and stuff, even though it was predictable, I didn't really realize where this was going. And so when I've seen like screenshots or concept art, basically anything that involves like Amicia and Hugo like hugging or having a moment just like crushes me all over again whenever I see it, because you know where it leads. They just did. I really think the connection to them, I think portraying like child cancer, and accepting that not everything always is gonna work out well, kind of that responsibility of a sibling or a parent to a little one, especially a little one who has a terminal issue, I think was just really well portrayed. These characters were really well written. I really enjoyed, the graphics of this game are just out of this world. The gameplay mechanics take some getting used to, but I ended up having a lot of fun with them. And it was just really good. I really wish this was going to get more attention for Game of the Year. Ragnarok and Elden Ring are going to dominate that conversation, unfortunately. And if you can play this, either way, thank you for listening if you made it to the end. I wish I was more organized here, but this was the best way for me, I feel like, to get my thoughts out and to kind of start to recover from this game in the best possible way. And that's where I'm going to end this one. Please subscribe to this channel if you like this video and you want more. Please like this video and leave a comment down below. Check me out on social media, at Bon Diesel on Twitter, as well as most other places, including on Twitch. Check out my podcast, The Echo Cast. It's on all platforms and this YouTube channel. That's all I have. So until next time.